The fertility rate in the United States is collapsing. And you all knew this, and this spells trouble for us. Why? Well, the argument about the southern border, a component of it, many people are stating that the reason they're flooding in, why the U.S. government is allowing them to come in, is because we're not having kids. And if we don't have kids and there's no people in this country, then, you have no country. The powers that be don't want that to happen, so they will import people from other countries to maintain population expansion and economic growth. It's not just about the existence of the country, but the fractional reserve banking system by which we exist upon requires a massive influx of new people constantly, which also strains and stresses the system. And I think will eventually collapse, but it is what it is. Now, I don't know that that's true. What I can tell you is they are flooding the southern border. The government is letting them in, and the birth rate is collapsing. Here's my fear. Americans of American value have kids. Those values are transported from one person to another, transfused from adult to parent. Not always, but, to a great degree. If we bring in people who aren't American because we're not having kids, the end result is devastating. A new population that does not care about American values, the Constitution, and our good ideas die. And then the terrifying thing is bad ideas could prevail. This is why this story is so important. Take a look at this. The Daily Mail reports the plummeting fertility rates across the U.S. have been laid bare in a dailymail.com interactive map. Births in America have been on the decline for years, plummeting 22% nationwide since 2007. Data suggests. With a downward trend prompting warnings, the U.S. is now on an irreversible path of economic decline. In 2007, the birth rate was 14.3 births per 1,000 people. The latest year with data, this has dropped to just 11.1 per 1,000 people. The dramatic fall in births and an expanding aging population, experts say, could force a rise in taxes to cover programs like Medicare and Social Security, leaving less disposable income available to bolster spending. Elon Musk has previously warned that the decline is now the biggest threat to civilization, with experts warning it will have a damaging impact on society. It really will. The largest decline is in Utah, and that's worrying because we got a lot of conservatives in Utah, a lot of libertarian-minded individuals as well. The smallest decline is in North Dakota, so okay. You take a look at this, and we can see in this interactive map, the population decline in California, it has dropped by 31.3%. I ain't crying about it. You look at New York, 20%. Illinois is 28%. Texas is 24%. Now, here's the good news. And this is where it gets interesting. Bad news for liberals. In Nebraska, 18. In Iowa, 16. Missouri, 19. Arkansas. The point is, conservative-leaning states, they tend to be doing all right, or better than many of these blue and liberal states. Georgia's down. Florida's down quite a bit. But, it's not absolute. Pennsylvania's at 16. Maine is at 18. Here's what we need. People need to have babies. Lots of babies. And I'd recommend if you're libertarian, conservative, post-liberal, whatever, freedom faction, as I like to call it, have a lot of babies. Oh, what's that? Everyone's saying, Tim, why don't you have babies? Working on it. And then I'll keep everything else private. That's all I can say. I do firmly believe people should have more babies. And what we're seeing with the left, they're not having babies. They're aborting their kids. They're sterilizing their kids. They're less likely to have kids. California especially. Perhaps the reason California is so hell-bent on bringing in new people is because because the birth rates collapsed by 30%. It's a big reason. But that spells bad news for the country as a whole. How do you win a culture war? I said it before and I'll say it again. You can build culture, and that's what we're doing. But the most important thing is that every single person who agrees with our opinions on meritocracy, the Constitution, personal liberties, America, et cetera, have 7 babies. I know many of you are like, how am I supposed to do that? It's too hard. The economy is really, really bad. How did people who lived in the wilderness do it? No. I know you can't go live in the wilderness. It's not the same. But back in the day, when people had 7 kids, how did they do it? How did they find food? How did they feed their kids? Come on. Food, it's getting expensive. And we've got a bunch of really, really fat people in this country. But instead of converting Twinkies into body fat, convert Twinkies into babies. You see what I'm saying? Here's what I see. We have a very, very fat nation that eats a lot of carbohydrates. Now, typically when you're looking at the math, more food means more babies. Unless you get to a country that prioritizes abortions, lewd and lascivious behavior, degeneracy, you'll end up with people who don't want to have kids. and will consume those calories themselves. So instead of converting the food we're producing into more people, let's say you have 100 food units per week. Your bodily requirement is 60 food units. Let's say you and your wife, you need at least 60 food units. I'm using arbitrary numbers here. What's happening is the excess 40 per week, which should be going to children who consume those food units and then grow, are being eaten by the parents, and the parents then get fat. You see the problem? That is the urban liberal sensibility, I suppose. Not all liberals are fat. In fact, in Chicago, it's like, I was reading somewhere that Chicago has a really, really high physically active population, but a lot of obesity as well. It's interesting, that polarization. My point is, instead of eating the extra steak and then having ice cream for dessert, why not have kids, and that extra steak is fed to the kid, who then grows up and becomes another member of society. You see the point? Well, I can't tell you, the ideas that I have may be good, whatever. But I don't know how we solve for this other than advocacy. Take a look at this. In 1800, a woman would have 7 kids. Oh, that is crazy. 7. Where did we go? We had the baby boom. Look at this. After World War II, kaboom. Went from just about 2 to 3.5 kids. 3.5. And then in the 2000s, it was around 2. And now it's below replacement. So I wonder what it is. Change in fertility. Births per 1,000 women under 45. You can see that it appears to be deepest in more red areas. And I said this before, and I'll say it again. This is good news. Oregon, you're lacking. Good. I don't care. The red is in more conservative-leaning states, and that's a good thing. But there are some liberal states, too. California seems to be doing pretty bad. Look at that decline, man. It's kind of crazy to me to see that. What we need is 2 things: cultural reformation and more babies. I'll explain why. How many of you could build a toaster from scratch? None of you. Nobody could. There's a guy who did a famous TED Talk where he explained his journey to build a toaster from scratch. He couldn't do it. Why? Well, he could do some things, like getting the wire. He had to make it. Get the rocks, smelt the ore down, extract the copper, and then wire the copper. I don't even know how to do this. And the metal coils to make an electric toaster, I should say. The one thing he couldn't do, plastic. It was impossible. Full stop, impossible. So he cheated. He said, okay, I can't make plastic, but I can mine plastic. So his argument was he could take garbage plastic, melt it down, and mold it to get the plastics he needed to make the toaster. The toaster worked for about 30 seconds, broke, and then stopped working. And that was his success. Let me explain. To make plastics, it requires so many specialties that no single human could do it on their own. I mean, probably on small scale, a specialist might, someone might be able to figure it out. But it's a combination of the industrial materials, the high pressures, all of these things that come together. I can give you something much more simple than this. Thai food. Have you had Thai food? Man. Okay, let's not do Thai food. Let's do something easier. Mexican food. So you live in New York in the middle of winter, and you just had yourself a chicken burrito with extra sour cream and guacamole. Let's talk about that. Where'd the flour come from? Okay, maybe it was grown in your region in the summer and then stored throughout the winter, perhaps. Typically, they're just going to import it on a truck from somewhere else. What about the guacamole? Oh, that came from Mexico. You see the point? Each individual, how many humans could build a computer? It takes many, many people. Some specialize in building the robotics that, we have robots that make silicon chips now. Isn't that crazy? We've used chips to make chips. If we have less people, we have less people who can hyper specialize. And that means technology is hindered by it. The more people you have, the more specialties there are, and the more advanced technology can become. That's just simple reality. Now, the problem we have, and the reason I say cultural reformation, is that we're not having enough kids, so we need a culture that says we have more kids, but we need a culture that prioritizes specialty over inane influencer job type things. We need more people who say, I want to figure out how to build a jetpack, and less people who are like, I want to scream on camera and get views. You know what I mean? Not that attention is completely worthless, but the point is we have a lot of people in this country that I think do things that don't value us in the long run. And reforming culture in a direction of technological advancement, maybe building Mars colonies, is something we need. Maybe that's the goal of some of these really evil globalist types, international elites. The current system we have, I think, favors the world that I'm envisioning. Those in the freedom faction, post-liberal, conservative, libertarian, tend to have more kids, tend to agree with me on these things, and liberals are sterilizing themselves and aborting their own babies. The future seems to be the direction I've described it. That's why I feel like we're going to win. You go out and have as many kids as possible, and guess what? Give it 20 years, those kids are voting, and they're voting well. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.